I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter at Forbes. Joining me now is Steven Ehrlich, the Director of Research for Digital Assets here at Forbes. Steven, I'm really excited to talk to you today. As you know, you were the last on-the-record interview with Sam Bankman-Fried back in December, right before his arrest in the Bahamas. You also just recently talked to him while he's on house arrest. But I do want to take it back to that day, December 12th, when you were talking with him. Did he have any sense that he was facing any imminent legal trouble?
Yeah, thanks, Brittany, and thanks for having me. As far as I can tell, no. I mean, questions were swirling around him as to whether or not he was eventually going to be arrested. He was being asked all the time if he was scheduled to speak in front of the House Financial Services Committee the very next day, December 13th. There were questions leading up to it whether he might come to the United States to testify in person, and he always said that he saw no reason why he couldn't. That said, he had no intention. That said, he had no intention of going to the U.S. and he was going to testify via Zoom or some sort of video link. But I conducted that interview with him in the morning of December 12th. He was continuing to revise his testimony, which we published later that evening after he was arrested, which was about 17 or 18 pages long. So it's clear that he was working very hard on it. And if he was going to be arrested when we spoke that morning, I got no indication of it. My sense is that this was a surprise to him.
And you just reported on a pretty important phone call he received just a few hours after you talked to him from his lawyer. What can you tell us about that?
Right. So some of the sources that I spoke with that are familiar with the events of that day suggest that he got a phone call from his New York-based lawyers early that evening from the FBI. And he was told that the Bahamian police were on their way to arrest him. They were going to arrest him in 40 minutes. However, if he wanted to, he could agree to extradition, return to the United States, and the FBI would come and get him on a private plane out that night before the Bahamian police would be able to reach him. Obviously, when that happened, it startled him, his parents, who were staying with him in the Bahamas during that time, and were in the room with him when he got that phone call. And they frantically tried to call anybody that they could. They reached out to the national security director. They reached out to the reached out to the second in command or second in power at the Attorney General's office, as well as the head of the Bahamian Securities Commission, and they all claim to have not heard a thing. I actually heard back from the Bahamian National Security Director, and he denied ever receiving any phone calls from those people. But regardless, what happened about 40 minutes later, or 30 minutes at this point, as if on cue, the Bahamian police came in. They arrested Sam. They gave him about 5 minutes to take some medicine, collect a few belongings. Got asked all the time, like, what happened to all his T-shirts, FTX T-shirts and sweatshirts that he wore at media appearances, and basically that was his uniform for every day of his life. He said he left all those in boxes back in the Bahamas, because he left with basically just a backpack, and he was on his way to basically a drunk tank type holding cell in the Bahamas, where he was going to then get a bail hearing the next day.
I'm excited to hear about his time in that prison, but before we get there, why was there so little known about his arrest? Why was everyone so tight-lipped? Was the DOJ afraid he was going to flee the Bahamas or something else?
So it's difficult to tell exactly why there was so much secrecy about this, especially because it appears that the U.S. formally requested extradition through official channels on December 10th. That said, a number of people, including Warren Davidson, who sits on the House Financial Services Committee and is a Republican congressman from Ohio, suggested that perhaps the timing was not coincidental, and that certain people in the government may not have wanted Sam Bankman-Fried to testify the following day in Congress under oath, because that would have that may have led to, in their opinion, some uncomfortable questions about his close ties with members of Congress. He had regularly met with SEC Chairman Gary Gensler and other key officials at the SEC, and there were questions about whether or not that close relationship engendered between him, FTX, and elements of the federal government may have caused them to keep their eye off of the ball, so to speak.
Steven,
None of that has been confirmed, though.
Got it. And Stephen, it's really interesting that you talked to him just a few hours before all this went down. I mean, you really had a finger on the pulse there. You talked to him for almost an hour and didn't get the sense that he thought any of this was coming down the pipe so soon. So what was his response to the arrest?
I really think the response to the arrest, it's almost like you get a shock to the system. I mean, I think he was really just trying to get a handle of what was going on. Up until then, he was living in essentially a gilded palace atop one of the premier residences in the Bahamas, in a secluded private neighborhood, and all of a sudden he's getting thrown into a drunk tank, and he's now talking to security guards. He's trying to figure out exactly what's going on, trying to meet with his lawyers, trying to meet with his parents. The next day, he had a bail hearing where he was denied bail rather quickly, which meant that he was going to have to be sent to the infamous Fox Hill prison, which, according to the U.S. State Department, is bereft with all kinds of poor conditions, like maggots and poor sanitation, so on and so forth. And I think he was really just trying to figure out the next steps, understand exactly what type of legal jeopardy he was in. He had trouble even just finding the indictments against him, and I think just really trying to get his bearings. I mean, he really was thrown into a world that he did not know anything about. When we were speaking, he told me that he thought prison was going to be kind of like the Shawshank Redemption, obviously one of the most famous movies of all time. And one element of that he was really speaking to was the belief that, for instance, a lot of the prisoners in the movie claimed to be innocent, and that they were in there for various reasons. And I mean, Sam basically told me that once he got there, he realized that he was the only person who, he says he was innocent. Obviously, he's professing innocence, and that's something that will ultimately need to be decided in a court of law. But most of his prisoners there, most of his fellow prisoners, all just matter-of-factly said, yeah, we're guilty. We were involved in drug running or arms dealing. And the justification for that is, well, we can make 3 times as much doing this as we could in working at McDonald's. We didn't necessarily choose this life, and we'd be happier to have more normal jobs, but we do what we need to do to take care of our family. And if that means that we need to spend up to a third of our life in prison, so be it. That's the price that we need to take.
Stephen, that's really interesting that he was out there talking to prisoners and they were being so transparent and open back. Did he have any fear for safety while he was in prison there?
He was placed in the infirmary with about 5 other prisoners for orientation purposes. My sense is that because of his notoriety and the very poor conditions, according to the State Department and General Pop, that they did not want to subject him to that for reasons of safety. So he was in the infirmary, which let him get a few other types of amenities. For instance, there was a shower, although he describes it to me as basically the size of a small phone booth with a garden hose with one temperature of water, which he called it hose temperature. The towel could best be described as a 3 by 5 inch washcloth, more than a towel. So he basically said he could choose one extremity to wash before it became saturated. As I kind of say in the story, his life switched from trying to re-architect derivatives markets across the world to figuring out how to exist as a vegan in a Bahamian prison, which he claims, and I tend to believe him, he's probably the first vegan that they've ever had. So he was basically, his goal at that point was trying to get fresh fruit, peanut butter, stale bread, and just try to subsist. And his interaction, aside from just talking with the prisoners, his fellow inmates or roommates, if you want to call it, his daily meetings with his Bahamian lawyers. His parents came to the prison every day trying to meet with him. Because of some relic COVID restrictions, Sam was really only allowed to meet with his lawyers, although he said that his parents were able to sneak in one time, and basically it was just a lot of boredom and trying to make sense of what was going on in the world outside of him, especially as it pertains to his case.
The juxtaposition here of what you're describing as these horrible conditions is really jarring to what his life is like outside of prison just a few months ago as a billionaire. And like you said, the State Department did describe the prison as harsh and, quote, inadequate sanitation, ventilation, and medical care. So, you really could describe it as grim, but what did he tell you was the worst part of prison for 9 days?
That's a good question, and his answer was surprising to me, and he said surprising to himself as well. Uh, he basically said that he could have dealt with all of that. I mean, granted, he was only there for 9 days, but he said he could have dealt with the bad food and the bad beds and the poor showers and a bathroom with a toilet that only flushed if you poured a bucket of water down with it, if he had access to his iPhone. He basically said that the worst part of it was just the inability to get access to the internet, engage with the outside world, and it just was very, very confining. He said it basically is what was driving him insane. And he would get access to televisions once in a while. I know Bloomberg reported that he had access to cable TV. He told me that he didn't, and um, I guess because of basically his desire for access to information, he actually used his daily visitors to basically give them questions that he would ask them to answer, get answers for, and then hand those to his next visitor to come back the next day with a new set of questions. And he basically described this as a system of trying to recreate the internet with a 1 day latency, which I thought was an interesting system. Probably not something that is entirely original. I would imagine that many prisoners have tried that in the past to get words out to loved ones or ask questions. But the way that he described it as a kind of like a 1 day latent internet was really interesting and unusual to me. And my sense is that one of the reasons why he ultimately agreed to extradition to the U.S. With bail is because uh, although he was in the Bahamas, and the Bahamas have their own sets of laws and courts, uh, there is a pretty strong belief out there that the U.S. can certainly press its weight against a smaller island country like that, and there was a real fear that if he ended up getting extradited without bail and going to um, a harsh federal prison, that he would have little access to the internet, little ability to communicate with the outside world, and the opportunity to go back home and sit in his office and get on social media, to blog, to play online games. That's the world that he's really comfortable in, and that was really paramount for him, based on my conversations with him about kind of the decision making process behind agreeing to extradition, where obviously he's facing some very serious charges in the United States.
That's really interesting that it took only 9 days for him to realize, hey, I need the internet this much. But let's bring it to present day now. He
Mm-hmm.
obviously does have internet access. I mean, we all saw his newsletters and he talked to you. What was that conversation like?
Yeah, so I spoke with him for a little over 3 hours. A lot of it was on background, but a decent portion of it was on the record. And I mean, his life right now, he is at home. He wears an ankle monitor, which I was able to see, but he definitely seems to be somewhat in his element. He's kind of set up shop in his family's study, where he's got big dual monitors plus a laptop on the side that he uses for gaming. In fact, he played sort of an online fantasy game called Storybook Brawl, which is a company that an entity that FTX had acquired last March. And he, although he was engaged in an interview with me, he was playing the game throughout the duration of the discussion. He has sort of like a little, I guess, cot or bed to the side of his desk where he's able to sleep and take naps when he wants. And basically his day now is really doing things online, playing games, doing research pertaining to his case, speaking with lawyers. I mean, as we've reported and has been reported, and he's just blatantly said himself multiple times over the last couple of months, since FTX fell apart and he became CEO, he professes innocence. And although he says that he obviously did not meet standards when it comes to things like risk management and just good organizational controls at the company, he does not believe that he did anything criminal, and that ultimately he believes that that's going to be proven in court. Obviously, that's a big claim, and we are not the ones that are required to adjudicate that, but that's his belief. So he's focusing right now on trying to organize his defense, and he does, again, against a lot of advice from his lawyers, who would probably prefer he just shut up. He's not willing to do that. He thinks that that's a loser strategy. That the narrative against him is already sort of like preordained his guilt, and his strategy is to try to get public opinion to at least, if not go onto his side. In my opinion, his strategy is to at least get the public to be open to the idea of accepting alternative facts, and that the story that's being sold of this 30-year-old criminal mastermind who stole billions of dollars from unsuspecting investors, although salacious, may not be the entire truth.
Steven, this is really interesting. And as you know, I mean, he's been compared to Bernie Madoff for what has happened with FTX. And this paired with him not taking any accountability, whether or not he needs to, that's the courts to decide. But also him just playing video games while you were talking to him. The word that is coming to my head is flippant. Was that his demeanor at all when you were talking to him?
No, that's a good question too, because I asked him when I interviewed him on December 12th, and we had that discussion again while we were there, like what should happen to him. I mean, obviously, if he is guilty of, especially the most serious crimes that he's being accused of in the indictment, and the crimes that some of his key lieutenants like Carolyn Ellison and Gary Wang admitted to, he needs to go to prison for a very long time, and I think he would admit that as well if he did do it. He did suggest, though, but I asked him, just imagine a world where everything that you're saying is true, and that like this was not purposeful stealing of funds. I mean, just as a hypothetical. But obviously, this was still a terrible situation where a million plus people lost money. It led to all kinds of questions about regulation, the safety, the security of crypto, and whether or not it's a viable industry moving forward. Like should anything happen to you? Like what is an acceptable punishment? And he kind of said, like maybe like a civil fine. Right now, I think the largest civil fine that's ever been assigned to a crypto firm is an exchange called BitMEX, which previously dominated the crypto derivative space with something called a perpetual futures contract. I believe they got $150 million. He suggested maybe something double that. I'm not necessarily convinced that would fix everything, because obviously civil fines, there's always debates as to how much it actually gets paid, how much money actually gets paid, and when it gets paid, and greed is, especially in highly speculative industries like crypto, is something that just, if you go back through the centuries, is something that always kind of pops up over and over again. So I don't know if I don't necessarily think that would be a satisfactory answer to everybody, but that is kind of what he said. But I think your question was whether or not he comes off as flippant. That's not the impression that I got from him. I think there's probably two ways for me to answer that question. One, I don't think he necessarily is always dealing with the seriousness of what happened, and is fully grounded. But that almost might be a defensive mechanism in the case. I mean, we're talking about a company that a few months ago was valued at $32 billion, and he was literally like seen as the white knight of crypto. And I think in some ways, in order to be able to just function, given everything that he's gone through, you almost have to air gap yourself from that, or almost like someone who's dealing with a type of like family or psychological trauma. You have to find a way to function. And to do that, sometimes you can't always deal with the gravity or the weight of these types of situations, especially if he is trying to organize his defense. And I think he also is resolved. Again, courts will ultimately decide whether or not he's guilty, but he's consistent in his messaging, and he says that he did not knowingly commit any crimes. And I think he is going to continue, or he seems like he's going to continue professing that for as long as people are willing to listen. And that's kind of why he started his Substack, and that's why he's starting to speak to the media a little bit more. So I think those are probably the two best ways to answer that question.
Steven, I really appreciate your insight here. And anytime you do talk to him between now and October 2nd, when he's set to go to trial and beyond, I would love to have you back for a recap. Steven Ehrlich, thank you so much.
Great, thank you.